The air in the hotel bar was thick enough to drink, a cloying cocktail of expensive perfume, aged leather, and the ghost of spilled champagne. It coated my tongue and clung to the cheap fabric of my coat, marking me as an imposter in this world of effortless wealth. I felt like a stray dog that had wandered into a lion's den, my frayed nerves twitching with every clink of ice against crystal, every burst of throaty laughter. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, desperate bird beating its wings against a cage of my own making. I was hunting, but I was also the prey. My gaze swept the room for the 10th time, snagging on the polished gleam of a gold watch here, the flash of a diamond earring there. These people were predators of a different sort, their smiles sharp and their eyes assessing. They measured worth in carats and couture, and I was coming up short in every conceivable way. My hands, chapped from endless scrubbing at the hospital and the harsh soap in the staff washroom, were shoved deep into my pockets, hiding the bitten-down nails and the faint tremor that had taken up permanent residence in my fingers. I was a nurse. I saved lives, held hands, cleaned up messes others left behind. But here, in the dim, honeyed light of the obsidian lounge, I was nothing. Worse than nothing. I was desperate. And then I saw him. Mark, my ex, the father of my son and the architect of my current nightmare. He was perched on a stool at the far end of the bar, trying to look like he belonged. He wore a suit that was just a little too tight in the shoulders. A loaner or a rental, no doubt. He was nursing a drink the color of sunset, laughing with the bartender, the picture of a man without a care in the world. A bitter, acidic taste rose in my throat. While I was working double shifts, watering down the soup to make it last, and lying awake at night listening for the sound of footsteps in the hallway, he was here, spending money he didn't have, money he owed to, men who didn't accept apologies or payment plans. The debt was his, but the threats had become mine. They had found my address. They knew I had a son, Leo. They had left a note tucked under my windshield wiper, a single, terrifying sentence scrawled in angry red ink. "We know where you live. Tell him he has 24 hours. That was 12 hours ago. My blood ran cold just thinking about it. Leo was with my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, who thought I was at a late shift. The lie felt like a stone in my gut. But how could I explain that I was hunting down my feckless ex-boyfriend in a 5-star hotel because he'd borrowed money from monsters? I took a deep breath, trying to summon a courage I didn't feel. I had to confront him. I had to make him understand. I started to push through the throng of bodies, the expensive wool and silk of their clothes brushing against my worn coat like an accusation. But as I drew closer, the main doors of the lounge swung open, and my stomach plummeted to the floor. 2 men walked in. They were not like the others in the room. They didn't have the soft, easy confidence of old money. They were hard. Their suits were sharp, but they wore them like armor, not adornment. Their heads swiveled, scanning the room with a predatory stillness that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. They were wolves in a field of well-fed sheep, and their eyes, cold and flat as river stones, landed on Mark. Panic, pure and undiluted, seized me. It was them, the men Mark owed. I knew it with a certainty that was absolute and terrifying. Mark saw them too. The color drained from his face, his manufactured smile dissolving into a mask of raw fear. He slid off the bar stool, his movements jerky and uncoordinated, and started to back away. But they were already moving toward him, their progress slow, deliberate, and utterly menacing. There was nowhere for him to go. And there was nowhere for me to go. If they saw me, if they connected me to him, they would know they had their leverage. They would know about Leo. The thought was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. I couldn't let that happen. My eyes darted around, searching for an escape, for cover, for anything. The crowd was a blur of indifferent faces. I was invisible to them, but to the 2 men advancing on Mark, I would be a target. I backed away, bumping into a small table and rattling the glasses on its surface. One of the men glanced in my direction. His eyes were empty, but they saw everything. My instincts screamed at me to run, to hide. My back hit something solid, not a wall, a person, a man sitting at the bar, his back to me. He was tall, broad, a living wall of muscle and expensive tailoring. His suit was a dark, charcoal gray, the fabric so fine it seemed to absorb the light around it. Without thinking, without planning, driven by a primal need to disappear, I did the only thing I could. I pressed myself against his back, shrinking behind his formidable frame. I tucked my head down, my cheek brushing against the impossibly smooth wool of his jacket. I tried to make myself small, to merge with his shadow. My heart was a wild thing in my chest, threatening to choke me. I prayed he would ignore me, that he would assume I was drunk or clumsy. I prayed those other men would just take Mark and leave. I squeezed my eyes shut, a silent, desperate plea to a universe that had long stopped listening to me. The man didn't move. He didn't shrug me off or turn around to demand what I was doing. He remained perfectly still, a bastion of calm in my personal hurricane of fear. The scent of him filled my senses, not the cloying sweetness of cologne, but something cleaner, sharper, cedarwood, expensive whiskey, and something else, something metallic and dangerous, like the air after a lightning strike. I risked a glance around the solid column of his shoulder. The two men had stopped. They were looking in our direction, not at Mark, who was frozen like a fat rabbit in the headlights, but at the man whose protection I had so recklessly stolen. Their expressions were no longer menacingly confident. They were confused, hesitant, afraid. A low vibration rumbled through the chest of the man in front of me as he spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the ambient noise of the bar like a razor. It was deep, resonant, and coated with a layer of gravelly authority that demanded obedience. And it was right next to my ear. "Stay close," he whispered, the words a soft command that sent a shiver down my spine. "You're safe now." The certainty in his voice was absolute. It wasn't a promise or a reassurance. It was a statement of fact, as undeniable as gravity. I didn't understand. How could he know? How could he possibly understand the situation? But as I watched the two predators hesitate, their hard gazes flickering between the man in front of me and the exit, I realized they knew him, or, at the very least, they knew of him, and they were terrified. One of the men gave a short, almost imperceptible shake of his head to his partner. They turned, without a backward glance at Mark, and walked out of the bar as quietly as they had entered. The immediate threat was gone, vanished into the city night, but the tension in my body remained, coiled tight and painful. The man in front of me still hadn't moved. I was still pressed against him, my knuckles white where I gripped the back of his jacket. I felt like a fool and a trespasser. "Thank you," I managed to stammer, my voice a pathetic, shaky thing. I started to pull away, to put distance between us, to apologize for my insanity and melt back into the shadows where I belonged. His hand shot out, his fingers wrapping around my wrist. It wasn't a painful grip, but it was unyielding, a manacle of warm flesh and steel. He turned his head slightly, and for the first time, I saw him in profile. A strong jaw dusted with dark stubble, a straight, aristocratic nose, and a mouth that looked like it had been carved from granite. He didn't look at me, his gaze fixed on some point across the room. "Don't move," he commanded, his voice still that low, dangerous murmur. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I watched as Mark, seeing his tormentors leave, seemed to regain a sliver of his bravado. He straightened his cheap suit, took a large gulp of his drink, and then his eyes found me. He saw me with this stranger, saw the man's hand on my wrist. A flicker of confusion, then anger, crossed his face. He started towards us. The man holding me seemed to sense it without looking. "Julian," he said, the name spoken so softly it was barely audible. From a shadowy corner of the lounge, another man emerged. He was leaner than the man holding me, but he moved with the same coiled grace, a silent, efficient shadow. He intercepted Mark before he had taken 3 steps. I couldn't hear what was said, but I saw the look on Mark's face shift from blustering anger to the same stark terror I'd seen when the other men had entered. Julian spoke a few quiet words, and Mark practically scrambled out of the bar, tripping over his own feet in his haste to escape. The entire bar seemed to hold its breath. The low hum of conversation had died down. Everyone was watching us. Or rather, they were watching the man whose name I didn't know, the man who held my wrist in a grip that felt both like a trap and a lifeline. He finally turned then, his whole body rotating on the bar stool to face me. The full force of his presence hit me like a physical wave. He was older than me, maybe late 30s, with hair as black as a raven's wing and eyes the color of storm clouds. They were intense, intelligent, and they missed nothing. His gaze wasn't just looking at me, it was dissecting me, peeling back the layers of fear and desperation to see the raw, terrified woman beneath. A faint, silvery scar cut through his left eyebrow, a tiny imperfection that only made his ruggedly handsome face more intimidating. Predators are handsome, a small, hysterical voice in my head whispered. It helps them lure in their prey. "What is your name?" he asked. His tone was not conversational. It was an interrogation. "Alara," I whispered, my throat dry. "Alara," he repeated, tasting the word. "You are in a great deal of trouble." Again, not a question, a declaration. I could only nod, my ability to form words having completely deserted me. He let go of my wrist, and I almost sagged with relief, but the intensity of his gaze held me captive just as effectively. He stood up, and I had to crane my neck to look at him. He was immense, a towering figure of power and authority. The other patrons in the bar averted their eyes, suddenly finding their drinks or their companions fascinating. "The men your ex-boyfriend owes money to are from the Petrov family," he stated calmly. "They are not reasonable. The fact that they have now seen you with me has complicated your situation exponentially. They will see you as a weakness, my weakness." My mind struggled to catch up. Petrov family? He spoke the name as if I should know it, as if it were a household brand like Coca-Cola or Nike. The only thing I knew was that the name sounded as cold and hard as the men who had just left. A complication. My weakness. The words echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of my thoughts. I had fled from a fire only to land in the heart of a volcano. I don't understand," I stammered. "I don't know you." "You do now," he said, his voice dropping even lower, creating an unnerving bubble of intimacy around us in the crowded room. "My name is Adrian Thorne, and you and your son are coming with me." "My son." The words slammed into me, stealing what little air I had left. "How? How do you know about Leo?" The question came out as a strangled gasp. My blood turned to ice in my veins. A flicker of something, was it? Satisfaction? Crossed his face. "I make it my business to know things. Julian," he called out, his voice returning to a normal volume, yet it commanded the entire room. The man named Julian was suddenly at his side. "Sir, get the car. Tell the team we have 2 passengers, a woman and a child. Full security protocol." "Yes, Mr. Thorne," Julian said, his expression impassive. He turned and walked away, his steps silent and purposeful. Everything was moving too fast. My world was tilting on its axis, spinning out of my control. Just an hour ago, my biggest problem was finding Mark. Now I was standing in front of a man who knew my son's name, who spoke of crime families and security protocols, and who had just declared, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, that he was taking us. "No," I said, finding a sliver of my voice, a shard of the defiance that had gotten me through nursing school and single motherhood. "No, you can't. I'm not going anywhere with you. I have to get my son." Adrian Thorne looked down at me, and for a moment the hard planes of his face softened with something that might have been pity, but was more likely impatience. "That is precisely the point, Alara. I know where he is. Mrs. Gable's apartment, 3B, correct? My men are already outside your building, not to scare anyone, to watch, to make sure no one from the Petrov family gets any ideas. Your son is safe. I intend to keep him that way. The only way to do that is to bring you both under my protection." The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it was as terrifying as his knowledge. He had already dispatched men to my home. He had investigated me in the few minutes since I had hidden behind him. The scale of his power was something I couldn't even begin to comprehend. It was a tidal wave, and I was just a piece of driftwood caught in its pull. "You can't just—" I started, but the words died on my lips. What was I going to say? "You can't just kidnap me? You can't just take over my life?" He looked like a man who did exactly what he wanted, every single day. The rules that governed my world laws, social conventions, basic decency did not apply to him. Julian returned. "The car is ready, sir." Adrian nodded. He looked at me, his storm-gray eyes pinning me in place. "You have a choice, Alara. You can walk out of here with me now, and I will solve your problem. I will ensure you and your child are never threatened again. Or you can stay here, and I will walk away. And you can take your chances with the Petrovs. But know this, they will not stop at threats. They will come for your son to get to you, and they will get to you to send a message to me. Your little drama has become my drama." There was no choice at all. It was an illusion of one, a cruel piece of theater designed to give me a semblance of agency where I had none. Stay and face the monsters alone, or go with the bigger, more dangerous monster who was offering protection. My maternal instinct, the fierce, primal urge to protect Leo at all costs, overrode everything else, my fear, my pride, my confusion. My shoulders slumped in defeat. I gave a single, jerky nod. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, gone as quickly as it appeared. A wise decision. He placed a hand on the small of my back, a gesture that was both proprietary and guiding. The heat of his palm burned through the thin fabric of my coat and dress, branding me. "Let's go." He led me through the suddenly silent bar. The patrons parted for us like the Red Sea before Moses. No one met our eyes. It was as if we were encased in a bubble of fear and power that no one dared to breach. As we stepped out of the hotel's revolving doors, the cold night air hit me, a shocking contrast to the stuffy warmth of the lounge. And then I saw it. It wasn't just a car. It was a motorcade. 3 identical, gleaming black SUVs, their engines purring with a low, predatory growl, were parked in the no-standing zone in front of the hotel. Men in dark suits stood discreetly by each vehicle, their faces grim, their posture alert. The hotel doorman, usually so officious, stood rigidly by the wall, trying to make himself as small as possible. This wasn't a show of wealth. It was a show of force, an occupation. Julian opened the rear door of the center vehicle. Adrian guided me inside with that firm, unyielding hand on my back. The interior was a cavern of black leather and polished wood. It smelled like money, clean and sterile and powerful. The door closed with a solid, definitive thud, sealing us inside, shutting out the world, shutting me in. The SUV pulled away from the curb with impossible smoothness, flanked by the other 2 vehicles. We moved through the city streets like a royal procession, other cars seeming to melt out of our path. I stared out the tinted window at the blur of city lights, feeling utterly disconnected from the life I had known just moments before. I was in a cage, a beautiful, luxurious, rolling cage, and I had walked into it willingly. "We will go to my home first," Adrian said, his voice calm and even, as if this were a perfectly normal Tuesday evening. "Then, once I'm certain the route is secure, I will have Julian and a team retrieve your son." "I want to go with them," I said, the words surprising me with their firmness. He turned his head to look at me, his face cast in the moving shadows of the streetlights. "That is not possible. You will be safer at the house. Julian is the best man I have. He will treat Leo as if he were my own. No harm will come to him. You have my word." His word. What was the word of a man like him worth? And yet, I believed him. It was the most insane part of this whole insane situation. I believed this dangerous, terrifying stranger. I believed he would keep my son safe, because the alternative was too horrifying to contemplate. The drive was a blur. I remember the high, wrought iron gates that swung open, without a sound, the long, winding driveway lined with ancient oak trees, and then the house. Houses was too small a word for it. It was a fortress of glass and stone and steel, a modern castle perched on a hill overlooking the glittering expanse of the city below. It was magnificent and terrifying, a monument to the kind of power that could bend the world to its will. The SUV rolled to a stop under a covered portico, and the door was opened for me before the engine had even been fully silenced. Adrian got out and stood waiting, his hand extended. For a moment I hesitated. Taking his hand felt like a final surrender, a step across a threshold from which there would be no return. But the memory of those cold, flat eyes in the bar, and the thought of them ever landing on my son propelled me forward. I placed my trembling hand in his. His grip was firm and warm, engulfing mine completely. He led me inside, The interior was even more breathtaking than the exterior. A two-story foyer with a floor of gleaming white marble stretched out before me. A massive, modern chandelier, a cascade of crystal and light, hung from the ceiling like a captured star. The walls were lined with art that I was sure belonged in a museum, abstract canvases bursting with color, moody landscapes, and stark, powerful sculptures. The air was cool and still, and the silence was absolute, broken only by the soft click of our shoes on the marble. A woman in a simple gray dress with her hair in a neat bun appeared as if from nowhere. "Mr. Thorne, welcome home." "Elena," he greeted her with a nod. "This is Alara. She will be staying with us. Please show her to the Azure Suite. See that she has everything she needs. Food, clothes, anything." "Of course, sir," the woman, Elena, said, her face a mask of professional neutrality. She turned to me. "This way, miss." I looked at Adrian, a question in my eyes. He seemed to understand. "Go," he said softly. "Get settled. I have to make some arrangements. We will talk later." He released my hand, and the loss of contact was surprisingly jarring. I followed Elena up a sweeping, floating staircase that seemed to defy gravity. We walked down a long, silent hallway, our footsteps muffled by a plush gray runner. She opened a set of double doors and gestured for me to enter. The Azure Suite. It was larger than my entire apartment. The colors were muted tones of cream, gray, and a soft, dusky blue. A king-sized bed with a mountain of pillows sat against one wall. A sitting area with a plush sofa and armchairs was arranged in front of a sleek, modern fireplace where flames danced behind a sheet of glass. An entire wall was made of floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic, billion-dollar view of the city lights twinkling below. It was the most beautiful room I had ever seen. A gilded cage. "The bathroom is through there," Elena said, pointing to a discreet door. "The closet is stocked with some essentials. We can arrange for a fitting tomorrow to get you a more complete wardrobe. If you are hungry, the kitchen can prepare anything you wish. Simply use the intercom on the wall." "Thank you," I murmured, overwhelmed. Elena gave a small, polite bow of her head and left, closing the doors softly behind her. I was alone. I walked over to the immense window and pressed my hand against the cool glass. The city looked like a carpet of scattered jewels, distant and unreal. I could see the neighborhood where my apartment was, a small patch of dimmer lights amidst the brighter glow of downtown. Leo was there. My chest ached with a physical longing so intense it made me gasp. I sank onto the edge of the ridiculously large bed, the mattress sighing under my weight. What had I done? I had traded one danger for another, one cage for another. But this cage came with a promise of safety for my son. For a mother, that was no choice at all. It was a necessity. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to stop the trembling that had started again. I felt Adrian Thorne's presence everywhere in this house, in its silence, its pristine order, its cold, imposing beauty. He had taken me out of my world and placed me in his, and I had no idea what the rules were here, or what price he would eventually demand for his protection. An hour passed, or maybe it was 2. Time had lost its meaning. I had explored the suite, touching the silk of the curtains, running my hand over the cool marble of the bathroom counter. The closet was, as Elena had said, stocked with essentials. New clothes, still with their tags on, silk pajamas, cashmere sweaters, soft denim jeans, all in my size. The chilling efficiency of it all was not lost on me. He hadn't just decided to help me in the moment. He had a system for this, a process for absorbing a person into his life. The thought was both terrifying and, in a strange, unsettling way, reassuring. He was a man who left nothing to chance. There was a soft knock on the door. My heart leaped into my throat. "Come in," I called out, my voice hoarse. It was Adrian. He was holding a glass of amber liquid in one hand. He had taken off his suit jacket and rolled up the sleeves of his crisp white shirt, revealing muscular forearms covered in a light dusting of dark hair. A complex, intricate tattoo snaked around his left wrist, disappearing under his sleeve. He looked less like a corporate titan, and more like what he was, a dangerous, powerful man at ease in his own domain. "Julian has your son," he said without preamble. "They are on their way here now. They took the long route, a few diversions to ensure they weren't followed. Leo is safe. He fell asleep in the car." Relief washed over me so powerfully my knees felt weak. I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath until it came out in a long, shuddering sigh. "Thank you," I whispered, and this time, the words were filled with a genuine, profound gratitude that stunned me. He walked over to the sitting area and gestured for me to join him. I sat tentatively on the edge of the sofa, while he took one of the armchairs, sinking into it with a weary grace. He took a sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving my face. "We need to set some ground rules, Alara," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "For your safety, and for your son's, you will not leave this property without me or my express permission and accompaniment. You will not contact anyone from your old life. Your phone has been deactivated. We will provide you with a new one, with pre-approved numbers. When the time is right, all your needs will be met here. Food, clothing, medical care, anything you require, you ask me or Elena for." I stared at him, the list of prohibitions settling over me like a shroud. He was cutting me off from the world, from my life, from everything I knew. "This is a prison. It is a fortress," he corrected smoothly. "And you are not a prisoner. You are a protected asset. The Petrovs are not street thugs. They are a well-organized, ruthless organization. Now that they've seen you with me, they will assume you are important to me. They will try to get to you to use as leverage against me. My primary rival, Dmitry Petrov, would delight in taking something from me. Until I have dealt with him and his organization, this house is the only place on earth where you and your son are truly safe." He spoke with such calm, logical finality that it was hard to argue, even as every independent fiber of my being screamed in protest. He was making sense, a terrifying, claustrophobic kind of sense. "And what about Mark?" I asked, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. "What about his debt?" "Mark is a loose end," Adrian said dismissively, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "Loose ends are a liability. I will handle Mark. The debt will be paid, and he will be removed from your life. Permanently." The finality in his tone was chilling. "What do you mean, removed?" He met my gaze, his eyes like chips of flint. "I mean, he will be given enough money to start a new life somewhere very far away, with the understanding that if he ever contacts you or Leo again, or sets foot in this city, he will forfeit that new life. He will disappear. It is the cleanest solution. Surgically precise." He was talking about erasing a person from my life as if he were planning a business merger. And the most terrible part was, a dark corner of my soul felt a profound sense of relief. No more late-night calls for money. No more broken promises to Leo. No more looking over my shoulder, waiting for his latest disaster to come crashing down on us. Adrian Thorne was offering to sever the anchor that had been dragging me down for years. "Why?" I finally asked, the question that had been burning in my mind since the moment he'd first spoken to me. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me." He was silent for a long moment, studying my face as if searching for something. He set his glass down on the table with a soft click. "My mother," he began, his voice taking on a different timbre, lower, rougher, with some old buried pain. "She was a lot like you. Strong, proud, worked too hard. She was married to a man, my father, who was weak. He made bad deals with bad people. He thought he could swim with sharks and not get bitten." He looked away from me then, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames in the fireplace. "One night, they came to our house to collect. My father tried to hide behind her. He tried to use her as a shield. But they didn't care. They hurt her." To make a point to him, his hands clenched into fists on his knees, the knuckles turning white. The polished veneer of control had cracked, and for a second, I saw the raw, volcanic rage that simmered just beneath the surface. "I was 10 years old," he continued, his voice tight. "I was hiding in a closet, and I watched the whole thing. I watched him do nothing. I watched them break her spirit long, before they broke her body. She was never the same after that night. She faded. A few years later, she was gone." He fell silent, the weight of his confession hanging in the air between us. The story wasn't an apology or an excuse. It was an explanation. It was the key that unlocked the puzzle of Adrian Thorne. He wasn't just protecting me from the Petrovs, he was protecting the ghost of his mother. He was replaying the past, but this time, He was the one with the power. This time, the woman would be saved. I made a promise to myself that day, he said, finally turning his gaze back to me. His eyes were dark with the memory, but they burned with a fierce, unwavering intensity. I swore that I would never be weak, that I would never stand by and watch someone I cared about be hurt. I swore I would become so powerful that the sharks would be afraid of me. He paused, his gaze sweeping over me, from my tangled hair to my worn-out shoes. When I saw you in that bar, so terrified, hiding behind me for protection. And I saw those men like the ones who came for my mother. Something inside me broke. Or maybe it clicked into place. I will not let what happened to her happen to you. I will not fail again. I didn't know what to say. The raw, painful vulnerability he had just shown me was more intimate than a touch, more binding than a contract. He had given me a piece of his broken soul, and in doing so, had forged a strange and powerful connection between us. I was no longer just a random woman he had decided to save. I was a symbol, a chance at redemption. Before I could respond, the intercom on the wall buzzed softly. Adrian stood and pressed the button. Yes? Sir, Julian's voice came through, crisp and clear. We've arrived. The boy is with me. Adrian looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. I shot to my feet, my heart pounding with a desperate, joyful rhythm. Leo, I breathed. Bring him up, Adrian commanded into the intercom. He turned to me. The adjoining room through that door is for him. It has been prepared. Of course it had. I rushed to the door he indicated and threw it open. It was a child's bedroom, a perfect fantasy of comfort and security. A bed shaped like a race car, shelves filled with brand new books and toys, a small desk with art supplies. A nightlight in the shape of a star was casting a soft, gentle glow over the room. My throat tightened with emotion. My son, who slept on a second-hand mattress in the corner of our living room, was being given a palace. The doors to my suite opened, and Julian walked in. He was carrying Leo, who was fast asleep, his head nestled in the crook of Julian's neck, his small face peaceful and slack with slumber. He was clutching his worn, one-eyed teddy bear Barnaby. Seeing him, safe and sound, was like the first breath of air after being underwater for too long. A sob of pure relief escaped me. Julian was careful and surprisingly gentle as he laid Leo down in the Publishens and N5 Crife race car bed. He pulled the covers up to his chin, his movements efficient and precise. He then placed Barnaby beside him on the pillow. I rushed to the bedside and sank to my knees, my hand hovering over Leo's cheek, not wanting to wake him. I smoothed his sandy brown hair back from his forehead, my eyes drinking in the sight of him. Safe. He was safe. I looked up at the two men standing in the doorway, two dark sentinels guarding my world. Julian, the stoic soldier, and Adrian, the complicated, wounded king. My eyes met Adrian's over my son's sleeping form. In his gaze, I saw a fierce possessiveness, a stark declaration. He is mine to protect now. You are both mine. And in that moment, trapped in his fortress, my life entirely in his hands, I wasn't frightened. I was grateful. The next few days passed in a surreal haze. I existed in a bubble of opulent isolation, a strange dream from which I couldn't wake. My world shrank to the confines of the mansion and its sprawling, manicured grounds. It was a beautiful prison, with walls of glass and guards in tailored suits. Leo, on the other hand, thought he had died and gone to heaven. He woke up that first morning in a state of pure, unadulterated joy. A race car bed, a room full of toys he'd only ever seen in commercials. A personal chef, as he called Elena, who would make him chocolate chip pancakes for breakfast every single day if he wanted. He was too young to understand the danger we were in, too innocent to feel the tension that thrummed just beneath the surface of this silent, orderly house. To him, Adrian was a cool, mysterious giant who lived in a castle. He wasn't afraid of him. He would chatter away to Adrian about dinosaurs and superheroes, and Adrian, to my surprise, would listen. He wouldn't say much, but he would watch Leo with an unnerving stillness, his expression unreadable. I saw him once, sitting on the floor with Leo, examining a complex Lego creation my son had built. The sight was so incongruous, the deadly, powerful man and the small, innocent boy, that it made my head spin. My days fell into a strange rhythm. I would wake up, have breakfast with Leo, and then we would explore. We found a home theater, a bowling alley in the basement, an indoor pool that looked out over the city. It was absurd, decadent, and it kept Leo entertained while I wrestled with the constant low-grade anxiety that had become my new companion. Adrian was a fleeting presence. He would disappear for hours at a time, sometimes for a whole day. I knew he was working, managing his vast, shadowy empire from a state-of-the-art office in a wing of the house I wasn't permitted to enter. When he was home, the entire atmosphere of the mansion shifted. The silence became heavier, charged with his energy. He would join us for dinner, a formal affair in a dining room so large our voices echoed slightly. He would ask Leo about his day, and he would ask me polite, distant questions about my comfort. We were like actors in a play, pretending to be a family, a fragile tableau set against a backdrop of unspoken threats. One evening, I overheard a conversation not meant for my ears. I was putting Leo to bed, and as I walked back down the hallway, I heard voices coming from a slightly ajar library door. Adrian's and Julian's. "Petrov is getting bold," Julian was saying, his voice a low, clipped monotone. "He's been making inquiries. He knows she's here. He put the word out that he's willing to pay a fortune for any information on the woman who left the Obsidian Lounge with you." "Let him." Adrian's voice was like ice. "Let him spend his money chasing shadows. Are the perimeter patrols doubled?" "Tripled," Julian confirmed. "Nothing gets on or off this property without my knowledge. But he's not just looking, Adrian. He's posturing. He made a move on the shipping containers at the port. Cost us a significant shipment." "It's not about the shipment," Adrian said, weary frustration in his tone. "It's a message. He's testing my focus. He thinks the woman he thinks Alara is a distraction, a weakness he can exploit. Is she?" Julian's question was blunt, direct. There was a long pause. I held my breath, my ear pressed closer to the door. "She is the opposite of a weakness, Julian," Adrian said finally, and the conviction in his voice sent a strange, warm flutter through my chest. "She is a clarification. She is the reason the Petrovs and every other parasite like them will be burned out of this city for good. I have been content to coexist for too long. It's time to eradicate the competition. Prepare the men. We're going to war." I pulled back from the door, my heart hammering. War. He had said it so calmly, as if discussing a change in the weather. The abstract threat that had brought me here suddenly became terrifyingly real. This wasn't just about men in suits making menacing phone calls. This was about violence, about a battle for control of a world I couldn't even imagine. And I was the catalyst. My desperate, foolish act of hiding behind a stranger had ignited a conflict between two criminal empires. The next day, the change was palpable. There were more men on the property, their faces harder, their eyes constantly scanning the tree line. The sense of being in a fortress intensified. I felt the walls closing in, the beautiful view from my window starting to feel like a mockery of a freedom I no longer had. Adrian explained it to me that evening, his face grim. "Petrov has made it clear he considers you a target," he said, his gaze locked on mine. "I'm telling you this not to frighten you, Alara, but so you understand why the security measures are necessary. You and Leo will remain in the central wing of the house for the next few days. No one goes outside. No exceptions. Do you understand?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The gilded cage had just become a maximum security prison. He was framing it as essential for my survival, and I knew he was right, but it didn't make the confinement any less suffocating. My fear for myself, and especially for Leo, was a living thing, a cold knot in the pit of my stomach. My life was completely out of my hands, resting entirely in his. 2 days later, Julian appeared at my door. His face was, as always, impassive, but there was a new tension in the set of his jaw. "Mr. Thorne requires your presence in the study." My stomach twisted. "Is everything all right?" "Mr. Thorne will explain," was all he said. He led me to a part of the house I hadn't seen before. The study was a masculine room, lined with dark wood shelves filled with leather-bound books. A large mahogany desk stood in front of a window overlooking a rain-slicked garden. Adrian was standing by the window, but he wasn't the one who drew my attention. Slumped in a chair in front of the desk was Mark. He looked terrible. His face was pale and slick with sweat. His already ill-fitting suit was rumpled, and his eyes were wide with a terror so profound it seemed to have hollowed him out. He looked from me to Adrian and back again, like a trapped animal. "Alara," Adrian said, his voice calm and controlled. "There is a matter we need to resolve." He walked around the desk and sat down, looking every inch the judge, jury, and executioner. "Mark, here, has been located. It seems he was foolish enough to try and sell information about you to one of Petrov's men." My blood ran cold. "What?" I whispered, looking at Mark's pathetic form. "He didn't know much," Adrian continued, his voice dripping with contempt. "Just your name, the fact that you have a son, but he was willing to sell it. Willing to sell you out for a few $1,000s to pay off another debt." I stared at the man who was the father of my child, the man I had once thought I loved, and I felt nothing. No anger, no betrayal, just a vast, empty coldness. The last flicker of any residual feeling for him had been extinguished. "I have made Mark an offer," Adrian said, steepling his fingers on the desk. "I have a file here." He gestured to a folder on the desk, detailing all of his debts, his gambling habits, his various small-time cons. Enough to put him in prison for a very long time. Or, he can accept my generosity. He slid a document across the desk towards Mark, along with a pen. "This paper legally relinquishes your parental rights to Leo. It states you are an unfit father and are signing him over for adoption to a party who can provide a stable home. You will sign it. In return, I will wipe every one of your debts clean. You will be given a one-way, first-class plane ticket to anywhere in the world you want to go, and a bank account with $500,000 in it will be waiting for you when you land." Mark stared at the paper as if it were a snake. "There is one condition," Adrian added, his voice dropping to a deadly soft murmur. "You disappear. You never contact Alara or Leo again. You never set foot in this country again. If I ever hear your name, if you so much as send a postcard, I will find you, and the life you have will be over. The money will be gone, and the only thing waiting for you will be a prison cell. Or worse. Do you understand the terms?" Mark was trembling so hard the chair shook. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "For what? Forgiveness? Help?" I just stared back at him, my face a blank mask. He had made his choices. He had put our son in danger, not once, but repeatedly. He was a cancer, and Adrian was offering to cut him out of our lives for good. With a shaking hand, Mark picked up the pen. He scribbled his signature on the line. He didn't even read it. "Good," Adrian said with cold satisfaction. He nodded to Julian, who stepped forward and took the paper. "Julian will escort you to the airport. Your flight leaves in 3 hours. Do not disappoint me, Mark." Julian hauled Mark to his feet. As he was, being let out, Mark looked back at me one last time. "Ellie," he whimpered. "I'm sorry." I said nothing. I just watched him go. I watched as the source of years of pain and anxiety and fear was surgically, ruthlessly removed from my life. When the door closed, leaving me alone with Adrian, the silence in the room was deafening. "It's done," Adrian said simply. "He can never hurt you or Leo again." I sank into the chair Mark had just vacated, my legs suddenly unable to support me. It was over. The problem that had consumed my life, the problem that had driven me to that hotel bar, was gone, solved by a man who wielded power like a weapon. I felt a dizzying mix of relief and terror. Relief that the threat of Mark was gone forever, and terror at the casual, absolute power of the man who had made it happen. "Now," Adrian said, leaning forward, his expression serious, "there is one more problem to solve. Petrov." He stood up and began to pace in front of the window. "He will not stop. A man like that sees any perceived slight as a declaration of war. He sees my protection of you as a challenge to his authority. The only way to ensure your long-term safety is to remove him from the board entirely." "What are you going to do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He stopped pacing and looked at me, his eyes blazing with a cold fire. "I am going to end him. Tonight. I am going to his base of operations, and I am going to dismantle his entire organization, piece by piece. When the sun rises tomorrow, Dmitry Petrov will no longer be a threat to anyone." The air crackled with the force of his declaration. I saw it then, the side of him that he usually kept hidden beneath a veneer of calm control. This was the predator, the warlord, the king of this dark, violent world. He was going to war. For me, the hours that followed were the longest of my life. The house was put on a complete lockdown. Staff moved with silent, grim purpose. Julian and a team of men dressed in dark, tactical gear assembled in the foyer. They checked weapons, radios, body armor. It was like watching a scene from a movie, but the smell of gun oil and the cold, hard look in the men's eyes were terrifyingly real. Adrian emerged from his office, dressed in the same dark, functional gear. A handgun was strapped to his thigh. He looked like a general leading his men into battle. He saw me standing at the top of the stairs, watching, my arms wrapped around myself. He came up the stairs, stopping in front of me. He reached out and cupped my cheek, his thumb stroking my skin. His hand was rough, calloused, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. "I will be back," he said, his voice low and certain. "Be careful," I whispered, the words inadequate. "There is no one more careful than me," he replied. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Elena knows what to do if there are any issues. You and Leo will be safe here. This house is impregnable." He held my gaze for a moment longer, and in his eyes, I saw a maelstrom of emotions, determination, rage, and something else, something deeper and more personal that was directed at me. Then he turned and descended the stairs without a backward glance. I watched from the top of the staircase as he and his men filed out into the night, a silent army swallowed by the darkness. I spent the night in Leo's room, sitting in a chair by his bed, watching him sleep. His peaceful, innocent face was a stark contrast to the violence I knew was unfolding somewhere out in the city. Every sound from outside the house made me jump. The wind rustling the trees, the distant siren. I prayed to a god I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. I prayed for the safety of a killer, a criminal, a monster. I prayed for my monster to come back victorious, because my life, and my son's life, depended on it. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and gray, when I heard the sound of the SUVs returning. I rushed to the window in my suite, my heart in my throat. I watched as the men got out. They were tired, grimy, moving with the heavy exhaustion of soldiers after a battle. And then I saw him. Adrian emerged from the lead vehicle. He was moving slowly, favoring his left side. His clothes were torn, and there was a dark stain spreading across his shoulder. But he was alive. He was walking. He was back. I ran from the room, down the stairs, not caring that I was in my bare feet and the silk pajamas he had provided. I met him in the foyer. He looked up as I approached, his face etched with fatigue and streaked with dirt. There was a fresh cut on his cheekbone, and his eyes were hollowed out, but they lit up with a flicker of something fierce and triumphant when they saw me. "It's over," he said, his voice raspy. "Petrov is gone. His organization is broken. You're safe." And then I saw the blood properly. The dark stain on his shirt was much larger than I'd thought. "You're hurt," I said, my nursing instincts kicking in, overriding everything else. "It's nothing," he grunted. But even as he said it, he swayed on his feet, his face pale beneath the grime. "It is not nothing," I insisted, moving to his side and putting my arm around his waist to support him. He was surprisingly heavy, all dense muscle and bone. He leaned on me, a silent admission of his injury. "Let me see." He allowed me to lead him into the vast, marble-clad kitchen. I had him sit at the large central island while I retrieved the extensive first aid kit I'd seen Elena store under the sink. My hands were shaking, but my training took over. I carefully cut away the fabric of his shirt. It was a deep gash along his collarbone, likely from a knife. It was bleeding sluggishly but would need stitches. "This is going to hurt," I said, my voice all business as I began to clean the wound. "I've had worse," he said through gritted teeth. As I worked, my fingers brushing against his skin, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The adrenaline of the night was fading, replaced by something else, something quiet and intensely intimate. I was acutely aware of his closeness, the heat radiating from his body, the scent of sweat and blood and gunpowder. He was all raw, masculine power, but here, in this moment, he was also vulnerable, wounded, and he was letting me care for him. I stitched the wound with a neat, steady hand, my years of practice serving me well. He never flinched, just watched my face, his expression unreadable. When I was finished, I taped a clean bandage over the stitches. My hands lingered on his shoulder for a moment too long. "Thank you," he said, his voice a low rumble. I looked up and met his eyes. The storm clouds were still there, but they were different now, charged with an electricity that had nothing to do with violence, and everything to do with the unspoken thing that had been growing between us since the moment I'd first hidden behind him. He raised his uninjured hand and gently touched the side of my face, his rough fingers a stark contrast to the softness of my skin. "I told you I would protect you," he whispered. "You did," I breathed, my heart starting to hammer for an entirely new reason. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. I couldn't. I was caught in the powerful gravity of him, a force I no longer had any desire to resist. When his lips met mine, it wasn't a soft, tentative kiss. It was a claiming. It was rough and desperate and filled with all the pent-up tension and violence and fear of the past few days. It was the kiss of a man who had walked through fire and had come back to claim his reward. And I met him with equal force, kissing him back with a desperation that acknowledged he was my savior, my captor, my protector, my entire world. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. The hard, dangerous shell had fallen away, and in its place was just a man, tired and wounded, who had fought a war for me. The next morning, Adrian found me in the garden. Leo was chasing butterflies near a fountain, his happy laughter echoing in the crisp morning air. The world felt quiet, peaceful, for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The threats, both personal and external, were gone, neutralized, erased. Adrian came and stood beside me, watching my son. He was dressed simply, in dark trousers and a soft gray sweater. With his face cleaned and shaved, the cut on his cheek and the bruising around his eye were more pronounced, stark reminders of the battle he had fought. "He looks happy here," Adrian observed, his voice quiet. "He is," I admitted. "He's safe, cared for. He has more than I could ever give him." Adrian turned to me, his expression serious. "Alara, the threats are gone. Petrov's network has been absorbed or destroyed. Mark is on the other side of the world. You are free." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a credit card and a small leather-bound book. "This is a bank card. It's tied to an account in your name. There is enough money in it for you and Leo to start a new life, anywhere you want, comfortably. The book contains the deed to a house in a quiet town in Oregon, also in your name. It's yours. Julian can drive you to the airport whenever you're ready. You are free to go." I stared at the items in his hand. Freedom. It was what I had thought I wanted, what I had yearned for in the first few days of my confinement. A life away from him, away from his dark, violent world. A normal life. But as I looked at the card and the deed, I felt nothing but a cold, hollowing dread. Leaving meant leaving him. Leaving this strange, profound sense of safety I felt only in his presence. Leaving the man who had looked at me and seen something worth fighting a war over. The idea of a quiet, normal life, once so appealing, now seemed colorless, empty. My old life was gone, erased. My new life, the one he had built around me, was here. "This is a genuine offer," he said, his voice carefully neutral, though I saw a flicker of tension in his jaw. "There are no strings attached. I gave you my word I would keep you safe. You are safe now. My promise is fulfilled." I looked from the card in his hand to his face. I looked at his stormy gray eyes, the scar through his eyebrow, the hard line of his mouth. I looked at my son, laughing and carefree in the sunlight of this fortress garden, and I knew what I wanted. My choice was terrifyingly, wonderfully clear. "I don't want it," I said, my voice firm and clear. A flicker of something, hope, relief, crossed his face before his mask of control slipped back into place. "You don't want the money? The house?" "I don't want to leave," I clarified, taking a step closer to him. "My place is here now, with you." It was a conscious choice, a surrender, yes, but a willing one. I was not a victim being held captive. I was a woman, choosing her protector, choosing her life. I was choosing him, with all the darkness and danger that came with him. Because with that darkness came a safety and a devotion I knew I would never find anywhere else. A slow smile spread across Adrian's face, transforming his harsh features into something devastatingly handsome. It was the first genuine, unguarded smile I had ever seen from him. I was hoping you would say that. He didn't take me in his arms. His next gesture was far more significant. "Come with me," he said, taking my hand. He led me back into the house, through the pristine, silent halls to a wing I had never been in. He stopped before a simple wooden door and produced an old-fashioned skeleton key from his pocket. He unlocked it and pushed it open. The room was not like the rest of the house, where everything else was modern, minimalist, and cool. This room was warm and filled with old, feminine things. A dusty chaise lounge, a vanity table with tarnished, silver-backed brushes, a wardrobe with its door slightly ajar, revealing the faint floral scent of old perfume and mothballs. The air was thick with memory and disuse. It was a shrine. "This was my mother's sitting room," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've kept it exactly as she left it." He walked over to a small, ornate jewelry box on the vanity. He opened it and took something out. He came back to me, his hand closed around the object. "My father gave this to her," he said, opening his palm. Lying there was a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. It was simple, elegant, and clearly very old. It was the only thing of value he ever gave her that wasn't tainted by the money he got from his associates. It was his mother's before that. It was the only honest thing she had of him. He turned me around, and with surprisingly nimble fingers, fastened the locket around my neck. The cool metal rested in the hollow of my throat. It felt heavy, weighted with history and meaning. "When she died," he continued, his voice a low whisper in my ear, his hands resting on my shoulders, "I swore that the next woman to wear this would be one I would protect with my life. Someone who would be the queen of this house, and of my world, safe, cherished, always." I raised a hand to touch the locket, my fingers trembling. This was more than a gift. It was a coronation, a formal, significant gesture of commitment. He was passing the mantle of his devotion, the focus of his fierce, protective nature, from the memory of his mother to me. I turned in his arms to face him. "Adrian," I breathed, my heart full to bursting. He lowered his head and kissed me again, and this time there was no desperation, no violence. It was a kiss of profound tenderness, a seal on a silent vow. It was the beginning of everything. Later that afternoon, I sat on a blanket in the garden, watching Leo show Adrian his collection of interesting rocks. Adrian was listening with that same serious intensity, nodding and asking questions about the sparkly ones versus the smooth ones. The sun was warm on my skin, and the locket rested against my chest, a constant, reassuring weight. Looking at them, this fierce, dangerous man and my innocent, happy child, I felt a sense of peace that was so deep it was almost startling. My life had been torn apart, my world turned upside down. I had been terrified, held captive, and thrown into the center of a war. But out of the chaos and the fear, I had found this, a strange, unconventional, and yet fiercely protective love, a family, forged in the crucible of danger. I thought back to that night in the hotel bar, to the desperate woman in the cheap coat, hiding behind a stranger. That woman was gone. In her place was someone else, someone stronger, someone who had looked into the abyss and had not flinched, someone who had been given a choice and had chosen the dark, complicated protector over the easy, empty freedom. I had hidden behind him to escape my past, and in his shadow, I had found my future. He had whispered that I was safe, and I knew now that it was the truest thing anyone had ever said to me. I was home.